So it's going to be a very exciting morning. And we hope to see you in the evening too. But for now, it's about that time, and we are officially going to get started. And I would like to pass it to Carla Aldana to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, DJ Antonio Caesar, for the music. I think it's a great way to start today's session. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Karla Aldana, and I am Faith in Places Northern Illinois Bilingual Outreach Coordinator. And I'm excited to welcome you to our Green Team Summit Session 4, Climate Resilience from a Justice Perspective. Now, before we start, I will share instructions for those joining us and preferring to enjoy in Spanish. Buen día a todos, me llamo Karla Aldana y yo soy la coordinadora bilingüe de difusión del norte de Illinois para Faith in Place. Tenemos interpretación disponible en español para esta sesión. Si usted quiere escuchar en español, por favor haga clic en el botón de interpretación para habilitar la opción a escuchar en español. El botón parece un globo en el menú de Zoom abajo. Si aparece un diálogo de verificación, haga clic en habilitar para confirmar el cambio. Y finalmente, para escuchar solo en español, haga clic en silenciar audio original. Now I'm pleased to share with you a land acknowledgement honoring the ancestral heritage of the land on which I stand today. I'm calling from what is today known as Waukegan, Illinois. This is the traditional homelands of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, Oglala Sioux, Ho-Chunk, and Kickapoo. Let us pause for a moment, and I invite you to drop in the chat where you're calling from and the ancestral heritage of that land. You can use the link Native Land to begin answering questions about whose land you reside on and how you're benefiting by living on this land that is the traditional territory of Indigenous people. We also have a page on our website linked in the chat with podcasts, books, videos, organizations, and more that'll help you learn about the history of the people indigenous to the land where we live. This acknowledgement from Faith in Place demonstrates a commitment to continue the process to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. We acknowledge these Native nations are still present, and as a team, we are learning about the true history of our land. Our aim is to become a vibrant, inclusive community with environmental justice at the core of our efforts. Now, before I turn the floor over to Christina Cross to introduce our panel, I want to take a moment and thank all of our partners and sponsors that made today possible. We especially want to thank our headline sponsor, National Resource Defense Council. And we will also thank Open Lands, Sunrun, and our session sponsor, the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation. For more information on our generous sponsors, please visit our sponsors pages linked in the chat. And as a reminder, recordings of this session and all the Green Team Summit sessions will be made available after the summit. Now, I will turn the floor over to Christina Cross, who will be introducing today's panel.
Hi, everyone. I am Christina Cross, Faith in Places Senior Policy Coordinator, and I'm honored to join you today as the moderator for our panel. Today's panel will explore what climate resilience means and how it can only truly be achieved when built equitably for all communities. Doctors Pamela Ayo-Yatunde and Cheryl Giles, co-editors of the book Black and Buddhist, shared the following. In the wrong minds, resilience can be used as an excuse, as a reason to harm Black people, consciously or unconsciously. There's a common misunderstanding perpetuated by the media that resilience means you bounce back easily. None of us really work that way. For me, resilience has to do with putting the supports in place that will allow you to stay in the game for the long haul, end of quote. Our discussion will dive into understanding how communities are impacted by climate change and what supports and structure we can build to address these impacts together. We will have a Q&A with our panelists after their discussion, so please feel free to submit questions through the link in the chat. Then we will all join together in an action for environmental justice, led by Faith and Places Policy Director, Pastor Scott Onquay. Now, I'm excited to introduce our three panelists. Our first panelist, Delmar Gillus Jr., joins us from Chicago and serves as the Chief Operating Officer for Elevate. He played a critical role in passing Illinois' Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA, the nation's most equitable and comprehensive climate legislation. As a representative and negotiator for the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition during the drafting of CEJA, he was responsible for ensuring the legislation centered equity throughout and provided programs that created project opportunities and jobs in underserved environmental justice communities. Thank you for joining us today, Delmar.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is Karyn Bigelow. Karyn is co-executive director of Creation Justice Ministries. She has served as the policy advisor and project manager, as well as policy analyst and research analyst at Bread for the World, focusing on the intersections of climate change, food security, and racial equity. Karyn holds a Master of Divinity and is currently pursuing a Master of Science in Global Food Security and Nutrition, focusing her studies and research on sustainability. And this is my favorite part. Karyn is also a certified beekeeper, which is so cool. Welcome, Karyn. And our third panelist is Elena Grossman. Elena is a research specialist at the University of Illinois at Chicago's School of Public Health. In this role, she coordinates the Region 5 Pediatric Environmental Health Service Unit's environmental justice and PFAS work by making environmental health educational opportunities available for healthcare providers and communities. She is also creating a concentration in climate change, sustainability, and health, and a Climate and Health Institute at the UIC School of Public Health. She previously served as the program director for the Building Resilience Against Climate Effects in Illinois, otherwise known as BRACE, Illinois, and holds a Master's of Public Health from the University of Illinois at Chicago School of Public Health. Okay, so welcome to our panelists. And I think we'll get started. I'll just holler at one of the panelists and we'll kind of just take turns going through like that. So let's start off our discussion with an introduction question, which is climate change seems to touch everything, from economies to food systems to health outcomes. So can each of you introduce yourself with your name and your pronouns, where you live and where you work, and share a little about what area of climate change your work focuses on? Why don't we start with Karyn?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Karyn Bigelow, she, her, and climate change, the way that as my introduction talked about, I look at it very much from a food security lens. How are people experiencing hunger and malnutrition? And how is climate change then making people more vulnerable to hunger as an issue? And so when it comes down to it, there's this cyclical relationship between our food system and climate change. Our food system contributes to climate change with the emission of greenhouse gases, carbon, as well as methane and others. But then also as an impact, then climate change is then having an impact on the actual food system. And so it's becoming harder to grow things in the wake of sudden climate shocks. It's also becoming harder to grow things in the long-term issues of rising temperatures. And then we also see that people are struggling. We find that in the presence of extreme heat, food actually, and more carbon levels, we actually find that food is not as nutritious as it was under normal circumstances. And so this is an issue that unfortunately also, as we see yields decrease, that there's communities who are being impacted because this rises the prices. And so it means that some people people who, are already struggling to put fresh food on the table because of its cost are then being further inhibited because of rising food prices. And so because of that, that's how we see just all of these, it's a ripple effect really, that happens with our food system and how climate change has an impact on it, but also how it impacts climate change. But I won't go too much on a tangent with that, but just a bit of an intro for that topic.
Thank you so much, Karyn. And yeah, intersectional very much. Delmar, would you go next?
Sure. And thank you, Christina. And good morning, everyone. I always get to check whether it's morning or afternoon. I think it's afternoon for some, based on the locations. My name is Delmar Gillus. My pronouns are he and his. I work at an organization called Elevate, and Elevate, what we do there is that we focus on ensuring everyone has access to clean air, clean water, and clean energy. My role at Elevate is that I'm the chief operating officer. So I spend most of my day honestly dealing with operations, specifically back office operations. So a lot of spreadsheets. But what I'm also extremely passionate about at Elevate is making sure communities of color have access to clean energy economy. Often that's through job creation and creating opportunities. Because we do all breathe the same air, drink the same water, and use the same energy. If we want to fight many of the climate ills on this planet, we have to work collectively. This is not a problem where we can solve in affluent communities and hope that underserved communities kind of get brought along. If we use that approach, we won't be able to meet our target goals around the climate. So a lot of my focus, as you mentioned, Christina, was around helping pass Illinois' Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which is going to create literally tens of thousands of jobs across the state of Illinois. But more importantly, what it's going to do is it's going to provide access for contractors, workers, and communities to the clean energy economy. And I'm really looking forward to talking more about that as the panel moves forward.
Thank you so much. Let's hear from Elena next.
Hi, thank you, Christina. My name is Elena Grossman, she, hers pronouns, and I'm here in Chicago. And I, as previously mentioned, I really look at climate change through the lens of public health. And it really intersects with both what Karyn and Delmar said. I often will say that public health is kind of like the game of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, where you can eventually get it back to public health. It's from my perspective and thinking about climate change, it's all about risks and increased risk. And none of the health effects from climate change are new. Maybe there are a couple new vector-borne diseases like Zika, which we didn't really know about before. But for the most part, there are existing public health problems, but they're being exacerbated by climate change. And there's an increased risk. So everything from heat-related illness to all respiratory health conditions, vector-borne diseases, an increase, a longer biting season, all the impacts from flooding events. People who are in Chicago experienced insane rain this past Sunday or Sunday, where I am, I think 6 inches of rain fell. And you'll see mold, so respiratory health conditions, an increased risk of, injuries and deaths just in preparing for an event like that, whether it's flooding, wildfire, or hurricanes. During the actual event itself, most deaths in flooding events happen because people try to drive in flooded roads, and then cleaning up and afterwards. And then the mental health impacts, which are often from extreme weather events, but we're also seeing eco-anxiety. So just the thought of these increased risks and increased disasters is actually a new issue that I think a lot of mental health providers are seeing. And so trying to both reduce and mitigate these impacts, but then also prevent So both climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation. And the beautiful thing about both of these is that it doesn't only address climate change impacts on health from climate change, but it can improve social connectedness, which is so critical for our lives in general, mental health and other physical health aspects of our lives. So I'll leave it at that, and we can looking forward to moving forward with the panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Wow, this is such a rich conversation already. So I want to ask the question too, as we, often have young people and, people who are nurturing young people in watching right now. I ask this question a lot of people, what made you interested in working in the climate change or environmental field? This helps to, start having those conversations about, this is something you can do as a career, and lots of people do. So why don't we talk a little bit about, what got you interested in working in the climate change and environmental field? And let's start this time with Delmar.
All right. Well, that's a great question. And Christina, just building on your question, I think it's important that everyone understand that there is space for all of us in this quote unquote field. One of the things that when I'm talking to people about it, there's always the question of, well, how do you get in and what do you need to do? And the first step is really, to me, to be interested and passionate about the issues that we're working in. And if you have the interest, if you have the passion, there are folks like the panelists on this panel that are more than happy to help. In my case, a lot of my passion came from, I used to do a lot of consulting and actually worked for a very large insurance company that provides healthcare. And I was very happy with that job, but ultimately you kind of feel like, hey, am I doing something that is going to leave a positive legacy for my kids and my grandkids and for my family's neighbors and communities? And so when I was looking for opportunities, I wanted to find something where my skills could be utilized, where I could actually help at the community level and really have an impact. And as I mentioned, even though I am a chief operating officer, I've been really blessed to work at an organization like Elevate, where I can remember being out kind of driving around, and I was doing actually some tutoring in Inglewood, and I passed a construction site and I saw a bunch of workers working on a job site, and then I saw a bunch of community members that looked like me watching. And the visual of having basically folks from the community watching as a majority white work crew worked on a job, it came down to a simple question of why. Why aren't the people that are watching actually doing the work? It's in their community, it's work that they can be trained for. And I took the why, and then I started to dig into it and ask the question, what can I do to help address that? And from there, I worked with our team at Elevate to kind of start our workforce development team in our program. And Elevate actually started engaging community-based workers on the projects that we had funding for. And so it's not always something where it's the them and the others that can make the change. If you have the passion, if you have the interest, I'll tell everyone in this discussion that there are folks like myself that want to partner, that want to work with you, that want to provide you an opportunity. So that's kind of my story. But once again, I just want to encourage folks that if you're interested in this space, reach out to us. We're happy to have you and would love to talk to you about ways to engage.
Thank you, Delmar. Elena, let's hear from you. What got you interested in working in this field?
Yeah, sure. It's such a big question. And I feel like, kind of what Delmar was saying in terms of what his story was, everybody has a story. And I think that's really important. And we connect with stories. And one part of how I got into this field is connecting with other people. I love people. And I love talking to people. But it's also a challenging field to talk about with people and finding ways to connect. And, before I was in public health, I was actually working. I worked in Guatemala, and then I worked in Florida with farm workers. So similar work, but on different sides of the border. And, both relied on their physical health to feed themselves. Like if they were not healthy enough to work, then they could not produce, whether it was growing their own food or purchasing food. On both sides of the border, different perspective. And then similarly, as I then moved into public health and was thinking about the environment aspect, and then it became, well, now the environment is impacting their ability to eat, to survive. And you have migrants coming from Central America where they're not receiving, where they're suffering from extreme drought and can't produce enough corn to last the whole year. And so they're leaving. And then in the United States, if you have farm workers where their crops are impacted by the weather and they're not able to produce enough to then send money home to their families. And so that kind of evolved into thinking about even the larger holistic perspective of how climate change is impacting our health and how it's totally unfair, right? You have these existing inequities and what climate change does, it just exacerbates those inequities and it makes it so much worse. And so really trying to get to the root of these inequities and thinking about, I always like to think of, people are like, what is health equity? And the most basic definition is everybody has the same opportunity to be healthy, and making sure that everybody has that same opportunity to deal with climate change. And so that's kind of how I evolved into kind of landing where I am now, both like thinking about stories and how we connect with people, and then also how the environment impacts our ability to be healthy.
Wow, thank you so much. I think that dovetails nicely then with Karyn. How did you get interested in this field, and how did you get to this work?
Yeah, so for me, as a person of faith, I felt this strong sense of I need to do advocacy. I need to do it from a faith, perspective, and I really felt called to do work around food policy. And so, as I started working at a former employer, we were committed, and so much of the world has been committed for years now about ending world hunger as well as hunger in the U.S. Everywhere, extreme hunger by 2030. And one of the things that I was reading back in, like 2016, 2017 was this report that the FAO did. That was a food and agriculture organization of the United Nations. And they did this report around climate change. And in the report, in the introduction, it talked about how by 2030, over 100 million people can be pushed back into extreme poverty by 2030. And consequently, that would mean, extreme hunger as well. And so for me, it was just this like aha moment of like, why aren't we talking about climate more at our organization? Because the very thing that threatens to undo the goal that we're working towards, which is to end hunger by 2030, we're now in a position where this is the very thing that can undo it. And yet we're not talking about it. And so that's when I became the annoying climate person at my organization. So then like, we need to talk about climate, we need to talk about climate. And then eventually I got a role there where then I started leading the portfolio around food systems and climate. And so it was a process that took a few years to kind of come into this space. And then now being at Creation Justice Ministries, I'm now, focused on the environment, knowing that in order for us to, address a lot of the inequities that we have in our country and around the world, it necessitates us to look at the environment. And also a lot of those things can be if done properly, they can actually, a lot of the solutions can also undo a lot of the injustices that we see. And so I think there's the tension of like the problem and the promise. And so really that's kind of how I kind of came to this experience, and just, years of discernment and just, a journey it's been.
That's so great. Thank you. I think we have time for one more of our questions before we transition to a Q&A. So I want to ask you, we named this session Climate Resilience from a Justice Perspective. And, we recognize that the burden of building climate resilience, cannot be placed on the populations that are most vulnerable to the impacts. So from your experience then, how does building climate resilience intersect with addressing injustice? And we'll start this time with Elena.
Yeah, the big question. But actually, Karyn's response segued nicely into it. As she mentioned, there are so many solutions that to climate change that address so many different aspects. There's like a cartoon where it's like, well, if we don't do something about climate change, then it like lists all these wonderful things that could happen, right? Because it's like, there's so much of what we can do to address injustices, to address problems within our society. So, as I mentioned before, the baseline, I always talk about, like, when you think of like baseline, where does a community stand in terms of their baseline health status, from my perspective, but you can also think about whatever the baseline is. It could be housing, it could be access to food, and then climate change just exacerbates it. And so the issue is that, we're not all at that same baseline. And I think, when we think about building resilience, we can improve that baseline so that the resilience is also improved, and it's also improving other societal challenges and other inequities. And so I like to think of, you're addressing more than one issue by building resilience. And, I appreciate all of the vulnerability assessments that are out there, but we kind of know where these vulnerabilities are, and it's a matter of doing it and placing resources and ensuring that we also include the community in these decisions, right? That's like a huge component. And so actually doing it. And I think, when we actually do it, we're addressing so much more than just climate change, and really getting at some of these injustices that we see, and climate change is just bringing it all to the surface.
Thank you. I want to give Karyn a chance to weigh in. I know she's off to a very important thing here shortly, so I want to give you time to breathe. But same question.
Can you repeat the question again?
Sure. So from your experience, how does building climate resilience intersect with addressing injustice?
Yeah, so I think it was already said so well, is that at the end of the day, we know what the problems are, and resilience means that we have to make those things that make communities more susceptible to climate change, to, not necessarily natural disasters, but the aftermath of it. Like, we can't necessarily control the direction that like a hurricane comes, but we do know that when we look at a situation like a Katrina, a lot of that stuff didn't have to happen had it been properly, handled. And so how do we make sure that we remove a lot of those susceptibilities? And part of resilience means that we have to do the things that have been neglected for decades or centuries. Like, so many communities, especially BIPOC communities, have been not invested in infrastructure wise for decades. And so then how do we then, as a part of building resilience, how do we put more money into the economies of those neighborhoods so that they can have the infrastructure? But also what was brought up is how do we then bring the jobs to that community too, so that it's, so that it's multifold. And so in that way, we're building resilience economically, we're putting resources into the community. And so it's addressing multiple issues at the same time. It's also making sure that communities have some sense of sovereignty over what's happening. And so again, what was already said, like the community should be in the planning process, not a step after the planning and then be included. They need to be in the process for planning to begin with. They need to be a part of the implementation of these plans. And also what often is not talked about is that they need to be a part of the assessment of the plans as well. And so how are you making sure that communities are there from beginning to end? And so part of it is respecting their lived experiences, their expertise, making sure that we are looking at the injustice that people experience. And in order for us to have resilience, there has to be a respect of the injustice that is happening. I don't think there's a such thing as helping communities be resilient and yet still letting them stay in poverty, or allowing them to be able to experience hunger or chronic health issues, or, whatever the challenge may be. They can't be, you can't divorce or silo these issues. And so resilience means whole communities and not just, emergency responses, should I say.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Delmar.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think Elena and Karyn did a great job of kind of hitting on all of the key points with this. One thing that I would just highlight for the group, and I think Elena, you mentioned this, is just the connectivity between all of these issues is critical. There's a documentary that's called Cooked: Survival by Zip Code that literally goes through the connection between climate, food security, and health outcomes. And one of the, in the movie, it talks about if you were, it takes place in Chicago, and if you were to plot out where are there food deserts, where are there negative outcomes, where are there lower than expected birth rates, you go literally run through all of these issues, all of the maps look the same. And I can remember I was watching the news one day and they had the COVID infection rates up on screen for Chicago. And that map looked exactly like the maps from Cooked that were created in the late 90s. So part of what we have to do is to understand and see that all of these issues are connected. From Karyn's points, I think the sovereignty piece is critical. Sometimes we want to impose fixes on communities rather than engaging communities and asking questions and listening. So one of the key things that I'm a big advocate for is to listen. We have to listen because communities need the sovereignty to help determine their own solutions and shouldn't be dragged along the process of solving climate issues, food issues, health issues. And then also critical to this is the whole engagement process. How are we engaging communities? How are we addressing barriers? Because oftentimes the solutions to the problems are actually in the community, but what communities need help with is not someone coming in and telling them what to do. They need help addressing systemic barriers and things that have prevented solutions from working. And the last one that I'll share, Christina, is just to uplift and celebrate. We need to make sure that when we have successes, that we celebrate those and share them. If you want clean energy to promulgate across Chicago, people need to see solar on churches. They need to see EV stations in their community. And so part of what we haven't done a good job of is that when someone has a success, can we uplift that success and then share it with others and say, hey, we were able to do this. Let me help you do it. It's not about competing. It's about working together as a community to solve big problems. And I'll kind of end where this started, which is because all of these issues are connected, when you start solving the food security issues, you're going to start solving the health issues. When you start addressing the issues around clean energy, you're going to start to address security issues, food security issues, and health issues. So hopefully what everyone kind of takes away from this is, although all three of us have different expertises, the problems that we're solving at the community level are interconnected. And when we work together to solve them, we'll have shared solutions.
Very, very good. Let's transition to a time of questions from the audience now. And so I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing a lot of really great questions that we're just not going to have time to get to all of. But there's one that kind of sticks out to me. And again, you know, Faith in Place is unique in that we engage with, you know, the faith community all across Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. So I was wondering if perhaps you could each answer this question. What suggestions do you have on how to get houses of worship, people of faith, community groups engaged in action on climate? What are your suggestions? And whoever wants to go first can go first.
I just want to say, maybe many of you are familiar with Katharine Hayhoe, but she does an excellent job at this and really specializes in it. And I know she has a number of videos. And, you know, a big takeaway that I always have from her is connecting with people, right? And talking about it and not being afraid to talk about it. And I think that there's a lot of fear in that. And, you know, you might disagree with someone. I think it's also important to remember there was a study, I think it was at George Mason, where they look at like the 6 phases of climate change. And we all think it's either everybody in this country either thinks that the world is going to end soon or it's all a hoax. But the reality is we are all much more in between, which means we are more welcome to conversation about it, right? We're not so set in our stone. The media likes to portray that this is what we are. We are completely 100% one side or the other. And so I think it's important to remember that. And when you're having conversations, and again, I think you practice talking about it and you keep talking about it within your places of faith. And I think that there can be a space for it, and to remember that, you know, these are your neighbors and these are your friends, and to be polite in having the conversation. You don't have to yell, and to listen. You know, as Delmar was saying, I think listening, you know, we're in a point in our country where we are having a hard time listening to each other, and to step back and to listen, even if you disagree. I think you'll find that, you know, if you are, as I tell our 3-year-old, you know, wear your listening ears. If you put your listening ears on, people will see that you're listening, and they'll be more embracing of what you have to say. Even if they might disagree, they might hear you, and then they might share something back. And so then you can have a conversation. And I think the goal is to have a conversation.
Yeah, excellent point. Karyn, Delmar, want to weigh in?
Oh, I totally agree with that. The only thing I would just say is, or add to that, is that sometimes too, we have found that there is a certain anxiety or paralysis that often happens around talking about these issues. And so how can we honor that this is a scary thing for some people? And so how do we do it in a way where we're, you know, living in the tension of hope as we work on these issues, and being able to just not just look at the science of climate, which is important, but also the emotional impact that people are having. And what better than in faith communities to care for each other emotionally as well as we deal with these issues. And maybe there's more bite sizes that we can take action on, instead of feeling like there's this huge, you know, thing that we have to do. What, you know, we can write letters to our members of Congress. We can, you know, do stuff in order to encourage more, you know, regional sourcing of food, or, you know, whatever the case may be. There's bite-sized things that we can do. We can do, yes, I see in the comments about like less heating and cooling. We can also, you know, churches can have cooling stations. Like there's so much stuff that we can do that may feel a bit more tangible, and maybe some of those smaller steps are the things that we can do to have those larger conversations and about larger actions that need to be had.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Delmar.
Yeah, and then I what was said before is perfect, Christina. I'll just add a few pieces to it. I think, as was mentioned earlier, I think it's important to start small. Sometimes when we have these conversations, we want to start with the big solar farm or do something vast. I think when you're looking at it from a faith community perspective, starting at our own houses of worship and doing the small things, having a convening, having some small meetings where some like-minded folks within the faith community are getting together to have conversations. And if those conversations are not coming naturally, I would encourage folks to reach out to folks like Pastor Onquay at Faith in Place, reach out to Veronica Kyle, reach out to Reverend Brian. All of them have experience kickstarting these conversations and helping them move forward. And then the last thing, similar to what I was saying at the community level, is to lead by example. If the church can do something small, or the house of worship can do something small, then what that does is that for all of the folks that attend that house of worship, it then motivates them to say, hey, you know, we did something small. We just replaced all our appliances, or we did air sealing, or we did some insulation work. Highlight that to the congregation and then start to share that, because it's taking that first step and starting the process and then sharing those examples within the community. But I think it's a combination of working with strong organizations like Faith in Place that has taken a real leadership role in this space, and then doing things that are small, that are based on shared goals, I think is important.
Wow. Well, that is all the time that we have for today for our panelists. But I just want to thank so much Elena, Delmar, and Karyn for being with us today and for sharing so much insight and expertise and just inspiring. Now we're going to put into action what we learned and take a moment to act together for climate justice. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Faith in Place's Policy Director, Pastor Scott Onquay, to lead us.
Thank you, Christina, and good afternoon, everyone. As Christina said, I am Pastor Scott Onquay, Faith in Place's Policy Director, and I'm excited to be here today with you and lead everyone in an easy action to support climate justice in the United States. As you may all know, the Inflation Reduction Act was recently signed into law. This is the single largest investment in climate our government has ever taken. But the law did not happen in a vacuum. It was the product of pressure and action and involvement from constituents just like all of us. What we need now more than ever is to show our lawmakers that we are paying attention. We must thank our lawmakers when they do the right thing, and then we must hold them accountable when they don't. So this afternoon, we are going to call our senators. And so I'm going to ask for you to take a minute to please get out your phones so that you can participate in this action. Simply grab your cell phone. We're going to lead you through the process. All right, if everyone has their phones out, we're going to follow the process that has actually been put on the slide on the screen, but also in the text, you'll find congress.gov.members, find your member, and then we want you to click on that for the instructions on how to find your senator. Simply enter your home address, and you will get a list of your members and their phone numbers. When you call, you may speak to a staffer or leave a message. We're bringing up 2 scripts that you can use as guidelines for your call. Now, you'll notice that one script thanks the senator who voted yes on the IRA, and then one script expresses disappointment in those who didn't. If you're not sure whether your senator voted yes or no, I have an easy indicator. It's just this easy. Every Democratic senator voted yes. Hooray. And every Republican senator voted no. Now, we're going to really make this easy for you because I'm now going to invite our brave outreach director, Reverend Veronica Johnson, to take the floor, where she's going to actually call her senator live and demonstrate how this should go. Veronica Johnson.
Thank you, Pastor Anquay. I just looked up my senators using the link that was just shared and is in the chat, and I'm going to call the DC office of Senator Tammy Duckworth, who voted in favor of the IRA. Please listen in. Oh, the call failed. Let me try again.
Thank you for calling the office of U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth. Office hours are from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Unfortunately, we are unable to take your call right now. If you would like to leave a message for the senator with an opinion on the legislative matter, please do so via the contact section of our website at www.duckworth.senate.gov or by calling us during.
Reverend Veronica has received a message and she's going to leave a message for her senator.
A tour or flag request or any other matter, please leave a message along with your name, callback number, and a brief description of your request, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you and have a great day.
Hello, this is Reverend Veronica Johnson, and I live in Chicago, Illinois. I want to thank Senator Duckworth. Thank you for voting for the Inflation Reduction Act. This law will help to lower barriers to accessing clean energy and affordable health care, both important issues that make material differences in the lives of communities everywhere, and issues that are important to me, a person of faith and justice. I also want to thank you, Senator Duckworth. I want to ask you, that you work to implement the IRA so that vulnerable communities are not harmed by more oil and gas extraction and infrastructure. Thank you again for your work to protect our common home. Goodbye. It is that easy. If you get the voicemail, leave the message. If you get someone who answers, feel free to talk with them using this script. And that's all to it. Now, our Wisconsin Policy Coordinator, Alexander Malko, will demonstrate a call to his senator who voted no for the bill. Alexander.
Thanks, Veronica. I'm going to call Wisconsin Senator Johnson, who voted no on the IRA.
Senator Johnson's office. This is Alex.
Hey, Alex. This is Alexander Melko, and I live in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm calling to express my disappointment that you did not vote for the Inflation Reduction Act. This law will help to lower barriers to accessing clean energy and affordable healthcare, both important issues that make material differences in the lives of communities everywhere, and issues that are important to me, a person of faith and justice. Your vote against this law is a vote against those communities. Please consider that a vote in favor of clean energy and affordable healthcare is a vote that looks out for communities across Wisconsin. Please join me in helping protect our common home. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
You too, Alex. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Veronica and Alexander. We're going to spend a few minutes together making these calls. If you cannot make a call for some reason, take this opportunity to look up your senators and add their numbers to your phone. Remember that holding our elected officials accountable is exactly why we have laws like the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. So let's keep up the great work. So we want to give you a minute to try it. So hopefully you're dialing your senators now. Now remember, your script is right there. So when you reach the office, you can read the script right from the screen. I see some people are sharing comments in the chat. That's good, thank you. Thank you so much for participating. Voicemail, okay, wonderful, great. I'm super excited. Everyone's having a great time calling their senators. Yes, this is awesome, great, great. This is wonderful, super excited. This is what we call advocacy in action. So this is great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. Please go back to these resources and use them in the future as you continue to reach out to your legislators and let them know how you feel on the job they're doing. Now, thank you for taking the time with us today to put everything we learned from our panel into action. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Wade Halver, our Southern Illinois Outreach Coordinator, to close us out with resources, tools, and an overview of tonight's session.
Thank you, Pastor O. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wade Halver, and I work in Southern Illinois as Faith in Places Regional Outreach Coordinator. We have a wide variety of resources for communities of faith. I'm going to take a moment to highlight a few. You can learn about all of these through the resource page linked in the chat and also in this session's description. The first resource I want to highlight is our Faith in Place Action Fund policy platform. This is a perfect place to get to know the issue areas we work on: environmental health, climate change, clean water, economic justice, food access, and voting rights. Our policy platform shows which policies we are currently advocating for and has opportunities to take action on those. It also includes fact sheets for these issues and bills for you to use and learn and share with your faith community. If you haven't yet, go ahead and sign up for our Action Fund newsletter to get action alerts when there are opportunities to take action to support environmental and climate justice policies we are advocating for. You will get links to petitions to connect with your legislator, and also info on elections, including how to register and info on the candidates. And last but not least, we invite you to host or attend a Climate Champion workshop. Our policy team, located across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, are experts in connecting communities with practical tips on being politically involved. The team tailors the workshops to address current political issues and what audiences can do to act, as well as providing Advocacy 101 training. If you are interested, reach out to us and we would be happy to schedule a workshop with your organization or house of worship. Contact info is also available in the resource document linked in the chat. That's going to wrap this session up. And as we close, I want to share a quote that beautifully summarizes everything we've been exploring over the past hour. Gloria Walton, President and CEO of the Solutions Project, shares the following in the foreword of Leah Thomas's book, The Intersectional Environmentalist. The era of single savior, top-down, and siloed approach to change is over. The old way of thinking about environmentalism as a single, distant issue is long gone, because people are seeing that the solutions to our problems come from within ourselves and from within our communities. People are empowered and coming together to create the change they want to see, the future they want that reflects their values and visions. And our intersectional lives are at the center of it. The wisdom of generations of people of color and those from historically disadvantaged communities centers us in the reality that the climate solutions we advocate for must support a vision of true freedom from the multiple oppressive systems that have put us in the situation we are in today. Our thanks to each one of you for being with us today as we learn and take action for a just and healthy future. I also want to thank our sponsors and partners again. This session sponsors the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, We're so thankful for your support and the support of many others who made this session possible. We hope you can join us tonight for Session 5, Healing Centered Justice. This session will also include a panel that will explore what healing means for people of faith on individual and systemic levels. We'll also be welcoming Chetna Mehta, who will lead us in a live compassion workshop so that we can experience healing together. We look forward to seeing you there.